My name is Nikki Domke, and I'm the head of Teen Services at the Sterling Library. Thank you so much for attending our first virtual live It's All Right ceremony. Before we get started with our event, I want to go over some quick tips for using our platform WebEx today that might be helpful if you haven't used it before. So you'll see near the bottom right of your screen a chat and a Q&A feature. Should you have any questions, either for us or for our guest author, Daniel, please post them in the Q&A section. We will be doing our best to answer any questions you may have. Today, we'll be honoring all the teens who submitted stories for our competition this year. We will have the opportunity to hear from our guest author, Daniel José Older, and then the top stories in both middle school and high school will be announced. After the winners are presented, our guest author will host a Q&A session, so please stick around. This has been an incredibly difficult year for all of us, and I really want to thank all the teens who submitted stories to us, even though we could not gather in person for the award ceremony. I know I speak for many of the librarians in Loudoun County when I say that this short story contest is a highlight for us, and we look forward to it every year. Please know that your stories have brought us so much joy in this unprecedented time. And we are again awed, as we are every year, of your perspectives, talent, and above all, your creativity. Even though this past year has brought on significant challenges, this was a very successful year for It's All Right. We had 191 teens in middle school and high school submit their stories to us. Our teen services staff read each story before sending the finalists on to a professional judge to determine the winners. Every year, there are themes that run through the submitted stories. This year's themes included dogs, dragons, grandparents, mental health, war, magic, survival, dreams versus reality, and for the first time, a story about a crab. It is evident how much work you have put into writing these stories, and it is an honor to be part of the team that has the privilege of reading them. This year, we have received so many incredible stories. It is quite challenging selecting stories to go on to a professional judge because we had so many favorites. I want to stress that regardless of the outcome of the winners today, we hope that you will continue to write and submit your stories to the Loudoun County Public Library's writing contest in the future. Your writing skills and creativity will take you far, and we can't wait to see what you come up with next. I wish that we could be in person so we could have a big round of applause for everyone who submitted a story because you all deserve it. Before we move on to the awards, I would like to thank the people who have made this possible. Teachers and parents who shared this competition with their students and supported them throughout the writing process. Loudoun County Public Library Teen Services staff for reading and rating all of these stories. Loudoun County Public Library programming staff for helping coordinate all the behind-the-scenes pieces to putting on this competition and award ceremony. Loudoun County Public Library communications team for creating flyers, promotions, and emails to help advertise the competition and the awards ceremony. Karen Claudin, author of Hexbreaker, who helped judge the finalists. Loudoun Library Foundation for supporting this event and helping us bring the wonderful Daniel José Older to celebrate our teen authors. And we'd also like to thank Bev and Wright Horton for their continuing support of talented young authors in the It's All Right competition since its inception. You all deserve, like I said, the biggest round of applause. Without further ado, I'm going to let Angela introduce our guest author.
Hi, I'm Angela. I'm the head of Teen Services for the Cascades Library. I'm pleased to introduce It's All Right's 2021 guest author, Daniel José Older. Daniel is a New York Times bestselling author of the young adult fantasy novel, Ballad and Dagger, Book 1 of the Outlaw Saints series. He is also the author of renowned series Shadow Shaper Cipher, the middle grade historical fantasy series, Dactyl Hill Squad, and the Star Wars Last Shot series. He is also known for standalone novels, the Book of Lost Saints, Flood City, and several short works of fiction, including Salsa Nocturna. Daniel writes compelling stories with diverse characters. His book, Shadow Shaper, has been named one of Esquire's 80 books that every person should read. And the Time magazine called it one of the best fantasy books of all time. Daniel has won and been nominated for multiple prizes, including the International Latino Book Award, the Kirkus Prize, the World Fantasy Award, the Andre Norton Award, the Locus, and the Mythopoeic Award. Regarding his style, Daniel considers himself a disruptor on the literary scene, sharing stories that provoke thought and shake things up. As a diverse book advocate, he brings to life characters that are historically underrepresented and challenges other writers to do the same. In addition to his talent in writing, Mr. Older is a composer and musician. He has a Master of Fine Arts from Antioch University, and he astounds us even more by having worked for 10 years as a paramedic. We are grateful to have such a talented guest author join us today to share more about his unique background that has shaped his perspective and writing style. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Daniel José Older.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Angela. Thank you to everyone who had me here. And thank you most of all to the young writers. You folks are amazing. I have read a lot of your work between the samples that were sent to me, the snippets that were on the screen as we were waiting to come in. The thing I want to tell you is that I'm speaking to you writer to writer. You are all writers. And if nothing else, that is the most important thing that I want you to take away from tonight. It's so much less about who gets ranked where and so much more about the fact that each of you has committed story to paper, that you decided to express yourself, that you decided to tell the world about something that matters to you in your imagination. That is a huge gift that you have given the world, and I honor that gift. It is not easy to be a writer, to be a storyteller. It's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of hard work. So I welcome you to the world of being a writer. And let me say that you are all gifted writers, and that's an even harder thing to do. But what I know that we share is a love of story. And I have loved story ever since I was a little tiny little person. Just like most tiny little people, I loved listening to stories that my family would tell. I loved watching stories on the TV. Star Wars was one of my favorite things. I loved playing stories on video games and reading them in books and comic books. There are stories all around us, and stories do truly change the world. That is something I believe in the core of who I am, that story itself is one of the most powerful forces in the world around us. And that matters a lot because, as we've already been talking about, it's a scary world. It's a hard time in this planet right now for a lot of different reasons, for a lot of different people, and particularly this last year, we have lost a lot of people, and we have struggled through so many things, and we have reckoned with so many difficult things. And one of the reasons that we've been able to do that is because of storytelling. Stories all around us. Stories are raining down on our heads as we move through the world. Stories are whispered in the streets as we walk through our cities and towns and neighborhoods. They're everywhere. And the more that we engage with story, the more that we tell the truth and listen to the truth being told all around us, the better people we become and the better world we create. I remember really well this dream that I once had when I was in college, and I'll never forget it. I was going to a workshop about how to tell stories that would change the world. And I was in Boston, which is the city that I'm from, because we were all going back to our own communities, and we were learning about how to tell each other stories and talk to each other and tell our own stories. And we were on a break, and we were walking along the river. Boston has the Charles River, and we were walking along the river, a bunch of friends talking, just having a good time. And all of a sudden, it was like the camera just pulled out, and you could see the street we were on, and then you could see the whole city we were in, and then you could just see the whole world. And everybody in the world, they just stopped what they were doing, and they turned to the person next to them, and they just told their story. And all the other people stopped what they were doing, and they listened to those stories. Because stories are always about telling the story, and listening to the story, and sometimes responding back and then writing a brand new story. And all the stories that were being told, they rose up over the world and they turned into threads. And the threads formed a beautiful, beautiful blanket that covered the whole world and protected it. And that's what stories do. They protect the world. They change the world. If you let them, they change your lives. I know stories changed my life because, like I said, I've always loved stories and I've always wanted to be a storyteller. I didn't know how, though. I didn't know what kind of storyteller I was going to be. Why? Because I love so many different, I love music. I love, like I said, games and movies, and stories are everywhere. So I just didn't know what to do. And so I tried to do it all. And you know what? I'm still trying to do it all because I still love all of those different kinds of storytelling. When I was like when I was a kid, the main thing I wanted to do was draw pictures. But when I was drawing pictures, there was always a story. It was a monster, and the monster came from this particular planet, and here was his backstory, and then here was his best friend, and here's her backstory. I was always making up new planets and new worlds and everything else. And I was having a great time doing it. And then I got a little bit older and I got really into Greek mythology, and I got really into Star Wars, and I got really into politics, and I was reading all kinds of politics and history and mythology and all that cool stuff. And I was like, so much to learn, so exciting. And I started writing more. Then I went to college and I started studying music, and then I was using music to tell stories. And so when I left college, I said, you know what, let me try music for a little while. So for a long time, I was writing stories, but I was using songs to do it. Because sometimes the best stories, they don't have words, right? Sometimes the best stories are told through dance, through movement, through the way that we move our hands when we talk is a whole story in that, through the way that we care about each other. And sometimes it's totally unspoken, but you know that somebody cares about you. And I always think those are amazing stories too. It's not always going to be with words. So for a long time, I would just write music, and I was writing songs for choreographers, people who make dances. I was writing for puppeteers. I was writing for filmmakers, and I was always telling stories through those songs, through that different kind of music, whether it was the cello, whether it was the piano, all of these different instruments interacting with each other. And I was having a great time doing it. But also, the one thing about being a musician or a composer is it's a lot of people involved. And I was like, it's not just writing the music and telling the story. You got to make sure the trumpet player shows up. You got to make sure the bass player shows up. You got to call everybody and make sure they learn their music. You got to have rehearsals, and then you got to set a gig, and then everybody has to come to the gig, and you got to be on Facebook all the time inviting people to different gigs, and then who shows up and all this other stuff. And at some point, I was just like, you know what? This ain't it. I just want to tell stories. Why does it have to be so complicated? Why am I wrangling all these people, spending all this time doing all this other stuff that isn't telling stories? So I stopped it all. I said, wait, hold up. Now, let me rewind a second. During this whole period, as you guys heard mentioned, I was a paramedic. Paramedic is the person that shows up when you call 911, the person on the ambulance. If somebody is sick or injured, that's when a paramedic goes to work. And we would be out there every single day, sometimes saving lives, sometimes just helping people get back and go to the hospital if they needed to. It all depended what needed to happen. But I did learn a whole lot being a paramedic about stories. Why? Because every story, no matter whether it's about an evil wizard taking over the world, or a kid that just wants to ask somebody out to the prom, or somebody who's an ice skater, or laser beams, whatever, every single story is really about change. Every story is about change deep down inside. Something is different at the end of the story from the way it was at the beginning of the story. Change is the one thing that is true in all of our lives constantly. Change is always true. There will always be change. It's the one thing that we can count on is change. It is always, always a reality, which can be scary, right? Change can be terrifying because you think it's just supposed to be this one way and then suddenly it's changing. But change can also be really exciting because it's always in motion. There's always new things coming up. There's always exciting things. So it's important to remember that change is the key part of storytelling, that every story changes. It's the story of something different. For folks who celebrate Passover, every Passover, we ask the question, why is this night different from all other nights? That's what every story is always asking. What is different? What is different at the end of this story that wasn't the same at the beginning? That's what's are about. So when you're a paramedic, the main thing that you're doing is showing up to people in crisis. What does crisis mean? Crisis really just means change. It means something is different. In fact, if you take that word and rewind it all the way back to the beginning of its existence, crisis was a medical term. It's a term that doctors use, and they use it to say, this is the turning point in the disease, right? So somebody was sick, and the crisis meant that either it got better or it got worse. It didn't say which. All we know about it is that something has changed. There is something different. That's what a crisis is. A crisis just means something has changed. And every story is about a crisis. And every paramedic, night after night, is showing up for other people's crises to see what they can do to make it better. And that's so important to remember. Because a lot of times, here's the question I would always get when I was a paramedic. People would find out that that's what I did for a living at a party or whatever. And they would go, oh, wow. How do you even sleep at night with all the things that you've seen, all the things that you see day in and day out? First of all, I would sleep great. Why did I sleep great? I still sleep great because I was saving people's lives. What better job could you possibly have? People were literally being saved by these hands. That's an amazing feeling. And yes, also we would deal with a lot of bad things, trauma constantly. And that is intense. And I don't want to minimize that either. But here's the key that a lot of people would miss. It's not just that we would see bad things happening, because that is really hard. If you are just witnessing something happening over and over, or if you just, even just one time, even me, with everything that I have done and lived through and helped and seen, if I were to walk out on the street, now no longer a paramedic without my supplies, and see something terrible happen, that would be hard for me. Why? Because the thing that makes the difference is doing something. The paramedic never just watches something happen. Paramedic has to act. The paramedic has to do something to make that person better. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes you do everything you can and the person is still going to be hurt or injured or suffer. And you have to pass them on to the doctor and the nurse and just do your best. And that's all you can do. But what you know is that you did your best, is that you did something instead of just watching. And this is why stories are so important. Storytelling is doing something. If you are telling stories, you are making an action. You are changing the world by telling those stories. And in doing so, you are healing the world and you are also healing yourself. That's why I want you all to understand yourselves as writers. You are all writers. You're also really good writers, and that's important. But regardless of that, you're writers. Why? Because you write. That's what makes you a writer. You are a writer because you write. Not every single day. There have been entire years of my life recently as a writer where I did not write. 2019, I didn't write, not the whole year. I worked, I edited, I put out books, I did a whole bunch of stuff, but I wasn't writing for that year. And I was still a writer the whole time. So don't ever let anybody tell you you're not a writer because you didn't write yesterday or for a week or a month even, or a year, because I promise you I was still a writer. I put out 15 books. I didn't stop being a writer just because I took a day or a year off. You guys are all writers because you write, because you are committed to writing, to telling stories, to changing the world with your stories, and to letting the world know who you are, what your story is. Even if that story has dragons or weird creatures or a turtle or a crab or whatever it may be, you are still telling your truth. You might be using magical elements to do it, but that is still your truth. The best fantasy is all rooted in the truth. And then it can spread its wings and do all the different things that it needs to do. But that's why we love fantasy so much, is because it is true and it is magical at the same time. So, to come back to my story, I was like, all right, I'm tired of musicians. I say that as someone who is a musician, so I'm allowed to say that. I was tired of musicians. I was tired of trying to get people to show up to things and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, you know what? If I write a book, I will never have to deal with these people again. Don't get me wrong. I do love musicians. I do. And I love playing music with other people, and I love being in bands and all that stuff. But I didn't want to only do that. I really wanted to tell stories. So I stepped back from all of that, got my laptop, put it down, and I said, what am I going to write about? I'll never forget it. I'm a Capricorn, so I get really excited about something, and I just do it until it's done. So once I was like, this is the book I'm going to write, I said, bang, and I had a book. Now, I'm not going to pretend it was easy to get there. It was a long road to get there. But here's one part of the road that was really important that I hope is helpful for you and inspires you guys. I was a paramedic. In my head, though, in the back of my head, I told you already, I wanted to tell stories. Yeah. Cool. But in my mind, books were honestly just something that other people wrote. They were far away. They were impossible to find like as something that I would do. It didn't seem like something that just little me, just this little random kid from Boston like could ever do. I didn't know any writers. I did, but like I don't know. I had an uncle in the family. I have an uncle who was a writer, but somehow it just still didn't seem like a possibility, like a real thing. And so I just put it out of my head. And then I was also like, if I'm ever going to write a book, it has to be the best book of all time. Let me tell you something from my experience to you. That is terrible advice. Don't ever let anybody tell you you have to write the best thing ever if you're going to write. No, you have to write a lot of bad things. That's the reality. The truth is, every single book that you have ever read started out bad and then got good. They didn't just write it and then it was great and then blah, blah, blah. Every writer that you know, all of your favorite writers started out bad and then learned how to get better. And they learned by doing it, not by just sitting around hoping that it would just magically happen and they would be a good writer. They learned by writing, by living their lives, by reading, by learning a lot. That's how you become a good writer. That's the only way to become a good writer. So, like I said, I didn't really think I could write a book. It just didn't seem possible. Turns out it is totally possible. All of you can do it too. All you have to do is write and then keep writing and keep writing and keep writing. I'm actually doing it right now. I'm writing a book in a month because I'm on a tight deadline. And so I sat down and I said, okay, if I'm gonna get this book done, it's gonna mean I have to write 4,000 words a day. Now, that's a tall order. I'm not recommending anybody do that. That's a lot. That's a special circumstance. But the point is this, even if you just write 50 words a day or 100 words a day, right? And then even if you still take off weekends or only write every couple of days, at the end of whatever period of time, eventually you will have 30,000 words, a book, a short book. Most books are more like up towards, 60, 70, 80, 90,000 words. That sounds like a lot, and it is. But the truth is that if you sit down and do it, then it becomes a book. But I didn't really understand that. None of that made sense to me because, again, I just didn't think writing a book was something that a regular person like me could do. Little did I know I'm not a regular person, but neither of any of you are you guys, because I've read your work and you are all incredible writers. And what it comes down to is this: trust the story and trust yourself. The story will guide you if you let it. Your writer brain and your imagination will guide you if you let it. Don't worry about writing the best book in the world. Don't even worry about writing a great book. The first thing you have to do is just sit down and write, and then keep writing. Take breaks so you can take care of yourself, and then write some more. The thing that happened for me was I would work all night in the ambulance because I was working the graveyard shift, and I would see all kinds of messy things happen, and I would, like I said, participate and do the best I could to help the people involved and help them heal and get better. And I would do my best. And then I would get home and I would sit down at the computer. Usually I would go to sleep and then I would wake up, have some breakfast, sit down at the computer, and then I would just write about whatever happened the night before. I would talk about the guy who had chest pain and was sweating, and we were worried about him, so we put him on the EKG monitor to find out how his heart was doing. And his heart was good, and it turned out he was just nervous and anxious, and this was his whole history, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was the story. I would write about the guy that got shot, but he was okay too, because the bullet just went through and went somewhere else, and that was good because he was all right. So I would write about that story. I would write about sad things. I would write about happy things. All kinds of things that I had seen and participated in, and all of those things I would write. And it was easy. And you know why? Because it was a blog. I wasn't thinking too hard about it. I wasn't trying to write the great American novel. I wasn't trying to overdo it. I was just writing the truth that I knew. The truth is, I was just telling the story. That's it. And that's all any writer ever has to do. These stories happen to be true. But at some point I said, you know what? I would have just made up something. That would be fiction. That would be a novel. If I kept doing it, it would be a novel. And then I was like, if I added ghosts, that would be fantasy. And then I would be writing a fantasy novel. And that's cool. Why? Because I was always a nerd. I love fantasy. From Lord of the Rings to, like I said, Star Wars to mythology. That's all my jam. So I was excited. I realized that. I said, that's it. All you have to do is tell the story. And that one revelation, it changed my whole life because I realized I was wasting my time thinking that I should wait until the perfect novel showed up in my brain magically without me writing it somehow. And then I could just magically like transfer it to the paper and it would be done. And then I would just be the great American novelist, right? That's not how any of this works. That's how you never do anything, by trying to wait for the perfect thing and only do it if it's perfect. You will never finish anything, right? Trust the story, tell the story, trust yourself, trust your heart, trust your mind, trust your experiences. You have already lived through so many things. I know people are always telling you, oh, you're so young, wait till you have more experience, da da da. You have lived through a lot. This past year was a lifetime for most of us. Even if you weren't in the thick of it, just witnessing what was happening around us in this world was a lifetime of challenges, of sorrows, of overcoming things. You have all lived a lot, and your stories matter. Again, even if you end up telling a story with a ghost, with a goblin, with a dragon, with a robot, or just a very regular story about a very regular person living a very regular life, all of those stories are so important. Right now, we need your stories. We need you to tell your stories, to tell your truth, to not sit around waiting for the perfect novel to show up in your head like I was doing, to trust the story, the process, the joyfulness of everything that you want to do, and put it on paper. So that's what I did. I did it the best I could. And in the back of my head, I said, okay, I know how this works. I do know that in publishing, there's a lot of problems. And also just anything you want to do, there's going to be some amount of rejection. So cool. So I sat down to write my book. Got a bunch of words down. I think it took me a couple months. I had something that I was really excited with. That's way too fast. You don't have to do it in a month like I'm doing right now. I don't recommend it. You don't have to do it in a couple months. Some writers take 10 years to finish their first book or their second or third book, and that's okay. However long it takes you is how long it takes you. For me, like I said, I'm a Capricorn. I got excited, so I just knocked it out in a month, and it was pretty good. I was proud of it. So I started sending it to agents. Agents are the people who take your book and help you sell it to a publisher. Publishers are the people that publish it and put it out into the world. So you kind of need an agent for most situations to get to a publisher, but you have to send your book to the agent and then they have to decide, okay, I'm gonna work with you, and then they take it in. So it's a whole process. It's like applying for a job, basically. So I was like, all right, I'm ready. Started submitted it, and got rejected. Got rejected again, got rejected again. Now, mind you, again, I knew that was gonna happen. So I wasn't like, oh my God, I can't believe I got rejected. What? Like, I knew it was coming. You know how many times I got rejected? 40 times. 40 times. And I was not expecting that. I did not count on getting rejected 40 times. Now, in this book, at the time, it was called Sierra Santiago and the Invisible City. Kept working on it. Sometimes those rejections came through with really good advice. And so I would listen to that advice because I knew I was learning to write. I was still learning to write. So I kept learning. Sometimes those rejections came through with really bad advice. Racist stuff. Stuff that showed people clearly didn't understand what I was trying to do. Stuff that just wasn't getting it. And so I learned. I learned what advice not to take, which is just as important as learning what advice to take. So I made sure not to take the bad advice. Sometimes I did, and then I had to backtrack a little bit. I took the good advice as best I could. I kept learning, kept submitting. You know what? On like rejection 39, sometimes I think about this because I try to tell everyone whenever I teach or whenever I talk to, especially young people, but anybody really, I try to make sure they know that this book got rejected 40 times because it's easy to forget that. Because sometimes we see books on the shelf and we just think, wow, they must have just submitted it and boom, bam, 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 bam. No, it's hard. It's complicated. It took a couple years. And I don't tell you that to discourage you. I tell you that to encourage. I tell you that so that you know, yes, you will get rejected. That is a reality of the business. You will get rejected more times sometimes than you think. Sometimes it'll happen really fast. There's no telling how it's going to be, but there's a definite thing, which is change, and rejection is very, very common. What I'm telling you is you can't let it stop you. What if I had been like, 39 rejections? Well, I guess I'm just gonna give up and be an architect. Nothing wrong with being an architect, but that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a writer, and I still want to be a writer, and I am today. Why? Because I did not let those rejections stop me, and acceptance number 40 came through, and here I am. Shadow Shaper went on to become a New York Times bestseller. It became a New York Times notable book of the year. Time magazine said it was one of the best fantasy books of all time. It was given all kinds of awards and accolades, and it launched my career. And I went on to write 15 more books, and now I write for Star Wars, and I'm having a really great time. Now, it's been a long road, but I don't regret a single moment of it. And I've never published a word that I'm not proud of, and I stand by everything that I've written. Because I know that at the heart of what I do is story. And at the heart of who I am is story. And I know that if I trust the story, and I trust my own heart, and I trust the experiences that I've had, and I take good care of myself and take breaks when I need to, and take care of my family, and do all the things I need to do, I will continue to write great books and live my best life. And that is my hope and my prayer for all of you, that you trust yourselves, that you trust your voices, even if there's going to be people, and there will be these people who tell you not to, that you keep going, that you be who you are. Tell the stories you need to tell, even the uncomfortable, difficult ones. Trust the story. Trust your process. Take breaks and be gentle with yourself, because this is a hard world. And being a storyteller is a hard job, but it's the best job in the world. And I'm so, so proud of every single one of you for committing yourselves to the page the way that you did, for making us excited to find out what happens next, for making us care about characters that are literally just made up out of your own imaginations. That's an amazing gift that you've given to us. And so I want to close by saying thank you for writing. And please keep writing, because we need your voices.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It was wonderful hearing more about you and all that you've accomplished as an author. I got goosebumps when you reminded us that our stories matter. I feel like I can go write something now. Thank you for your encouragement, and I know it means a lot to Loudoun's teen authors. Remember that we will have the chance to ask Daniel questions after the presentation of awards, so during our Q&A section. So if you have questions for Daniel that come to mind, please put them in the Q&A section of your screen so they can be addressed at the end of our event. Now, Daniel will be presenting the top 10 stories from our middle school entries. There are 5 stories that have placed as honorable mention, 2 runner-up stories, and then 3rd place, 2nd place, and 1st place. All top 10 teen authors will be receiving a framed certificate and a book written by our guest author. 3rd place will also be receiving a check for $50. 2nd place will receive a check for $100, and 1st place will receive a check for $200. We will be in touch with all top 10 authors to coordinate receipt of your prizes. I know that you're all eager to hear the results, so I'm going to pass this back to Daniel to announce our middle school winners.
Thank you. The middle school honorable mentions are as follows. Ranking: middle school honorable mention number 5. Summary: a warm and cozy story that sparkles with sensory detail, a brilliant description of the joy and magic of Christmas. From Caroline's Christmas by Bryn Badili. Ranking: middle school honorable mention number 4. Summary: similar to both Peter Pan and The Giving Tree, and yet totally unlike either of those stories. Wholly original. Wonderful descriptions in this magical story. From Of Rust and Sky by Nora McCormick. Ranking: middle school honorable mention number 3. Summary: a feast for the senses, or just a dream. The author does a beautiful job of drawing readers into a maze of a dream. From Only a Dream by Autumn Roberts. Ranking: middle school honorable mention number 2. Summary: fantastically built dystopian world. Readers will enjoy finding out why the title is Orange, from Orange, by Evelyn Sprague. Ranking, middle school honorable mention number 1. Summary, the moving story of one necklace as it moves through 3 generations. Cinematic and heartwarming. From The Pearl Necklace by Charlotte Long. Ranking, middle school runner-up number 2. Summary, an earnest and hilarious tale of a crab tasked with stopping human war. Excerpt. One night, not long ago, a crab named Snap Shellington III was living his day-to-day life. He had a wife, Coral, and 2 kids, Bubbles and Claudia. They lived under the sea, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, in a coral reef. One day, when Snap had a day off from work and his kids were at school, a strange crab appeared out of nowhere. A bright light shone as he arrived in Snap's house. This stranger was an old crab with a long white beard. Hello, the strange crab spoke in a deep, booming voice. I am Sebastian V. I have traveled through time, and I need you to help save the world. From The Crab Who Saved the World by Darcy Marcoux. Ranking, middle school runner-up number 1. Summary, a memorable story about the meaning of life. Excerpt. Sitting through traffic brings up a recurring idea in my brain. Purpose. As I think about what I am meant to do on this earth, I don't marvel at how beautiful the grass peeking out from a crack in the sidewalk is. The idea of hope and nature standing tall against a man-made world doesn't cross my mind. Instead, I continue to wonder about purpose. Why am I here? What am I supposed to do to have a fulfilling life? Do I have to invent something, change the world? But how? From Unparalleled by Neil Whittier. Ranking, 3rd place middle school. Summary, a highly satisfying revenge story set in a restaurant. Excerpt. His face fell. My condolences for the loss of your father and your gold, I hear. Word travels fast around these parts. He was still a wonderful liar, but he could never fool her. Thank you. And yes, someone stole our gold from our deposit box in the bank. Not a huge loss, but we suffered all the less. She stared at him, watched him fidget under her gaze. This was amusing. From Revenge is Sweet by Sanika Rowe. Ranking, 2nd place middle school. Summary, a beautiful story told in free verse poetry about friendship and pain and tragedy. Excerpt. Most of them laugh when I tell them about my friend. Some of them avoid my eyes, anxious, when they realize I am serious. For comedy, they ask me what she looks like again, so I retell. She is not one color like you or me. She is a rainbow. That is when most of them leave. From a collection of colorful poems by Acadia Kincaid. Ranking, 1st place, middle school. Summary, the moving story of a girl about to be executed for treason against her king. Excerpt. Will I be forgotten? Not by history, of course. I will be painted as either a martyred hero or a murderous rebel. I do not doubt my fame, which might be better described as infamy. I'm sure I'll have a page in some book somewhere, but that isn't what I worry about now. I worry about being forgotten as a person. I have no idea if there's anyone left who remembers me, not the stories or the legends, although there are quite a lot of those. I hope someone out there will remember me as all I really am. A girl, a friend, someone who simply wanted her neighbors to be safe, happy, who didn't want war and suffering, but had to fight anyway. As a citizen who wanted what was best for her country, but got a little lost trying to find it. From Treason by Faith Lustig.
Congratulations to our middle school first place winner. Faith, we would love to hear a few words from you. So if you could please turn on your camera and unmute yourself now.
Hi. Okay. No idea what I'm supposed to say to this, but thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. I was like, that was just weird, but yeah, it sounded way more dramatic when someone was reading it. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed writing it. It was not expecting to win, but it's still exciting. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. I know it's a lot and you're probably surprised. Congratulations to all of our middle school winners. We are so impressed with your submissions, and I want to stress again how difficult it was for us to choose a top 10. You should all be very proud of the stories you submitted. Daniel will now be presenting the top 10 stories from our high school entries. This will be the same format as it was for the middle school winners. So we have 5 stories that have placed as honorable mention, 2 runner-up stories, and then 3rd place, 2nd place, and 1st place. Again, all top 10 teen authors will be receiving a framed certificate and a book written by our guest author. 3rd place will also receive a check for $50. 2nd place will receive a check for $100, and 1st place will receive a check for $200. We will be in touch with all the winners to coordinate your prizes. Daniel, I'm going to pass this back to you again to announce our high school winners. And don't forget, everyone, please be commenting in the Q&A section of your screen if you have any questions for Daniel for our Q&A session.
Thank you. Ranking high school honorable mention number 5, Summary. Another great installment in the Bearlock short story series with tight writing and a fantastic set of characters. This would be a wonderful series for emerging readers. From Bearlock Holmes and the Crown Jewels by Jonathan Zachrits. Ranking high school honorable mention number 4, Summary. Devastated, a realistic portrait of mental illness and recovery. Authentic emotions come through in the writing. From 724 by Lydia Smith. Ranking high school honorable mention number 3. Summary, a crazy good story from start to finish about an unusual character and their relationship with a nearby raccoon. From Confessions of an Epic Wizard Dropout by Amanda Anthony. Ranking high school honorable mention number 2. Summary, a haunting and rhythmic horror story with fantastic imagery and poetic repetition. From Everything That Reminded Her by Mika Dang. Ranking high school honorable mention number 1. Summary, uniquely fresh descriptions and excellent word choice from an exceptionally talented author. You could feel every moment of this story. From Noah by Tanisha Chaudhry. Ranking high school runner-up number 2. Summary, a tense story of power, intrigue, and dragons. That's it. That's such a great summary. Sorry. Excerpt. The hour was late. The forest was pitch dark. Not that any of these things mattered to Shangar. If anything, he liked the darkness because it more effectively concealed his large form. Shangar was a hunter, and he was tracking his prey. Crouching lower, he slowly stepped forward, his great claws scraping on a large rock. He quietly hissed, a puff of steam emerging from his nostrils, and withdrew. After a few moments, he slowly stepped again, further forward this time, and felt his paw sink into the earth. He grinned silently. His prey would never know he was there until it was too late. From The Last Great Dragon King by Eric Lyons. Ranking high school runner-up number 1. Summary, a brilliant biohorror story perfect for fans of Wilder Girls and Annihilation. Excerpt. Date, 12 Ayar, 1421, 12:31 p.m. Subject, only a few miles out from Lagaz Gama. Raya, I am in Mudila. It is a strange little town full of superstition and stories. This one Jidda told me all about another town a few miles away that burned down 100 years ago in some mystery. While everyone is friendly enough, I'm getting many warnings to stay out of Lagaz. But doesn't that just make you more interested in what is there? How exciting it will be to go through such an ancient forest. I plan on recording everything to present when I come back home. Of course, and I hope to discover enough to publish a paper. I hope that you're doing well. Please don't tell me that you're still worrying yourself sick. Missing you always, Iman. From Lagaz by Hannah Kazia. Ranking, high school, 3rd place. Summary, the dramatic story of a tournament with a princess's future in the balance. Excerpt. Your hands look more like a warrior's than a princess, he commented. It was true. My hands were rough with calluses from wielding a sword. My father didn't know how to raise a daughter nor a proper princess. It would have been my mother's role. Instead, he raised me the way he would have raised his son. How he was raised. I was raised a warrior. Why can't they be both? I asked, tilting my head. Indeed. He smiled slightly. Still, please cover them. We don't need to give your suitors the wrong impression, my flower. I thought my scowl. If my husband couldn't tolerate me being adept with weapons, then he had no place by my side. From The Tournament of Crowns by Ariana Paris. Ranking, high school, 2nd place. Summary, a lush tale of experiencing all-consuming art. Excerpt. Wilson had never seen such an extraordinary mural. It was incredibly detailed and so seamless as to be disconcerting. Each scene melted into the next. He could not say where the walls, floor, or ceiling began or ended, and he could not say how big the room was. It was one image and could only be seen as a whole. From the comets and stars above the individual blades of grass to the individual blades of grass on the floor. Mia Damius had painted all of it herself, his new neighbor, the only other person who lived within half a mile of his house. Do you like it? He'd forgotten she was standing beside him. The mural had pulled him in. He felt very close to it and very far from everything else. From Damius by Naomi Utgard. Ranking, high school, 1st place. Summary, an exceptionally well-written story about the hidden dangers of totalitarianism. Excerpt. Elk had liked to watch the flag running out in the wind over the green hills in swaths of black, red, and gold. Now the whole village watched in silence, frozen in clumps as Herr Vought hauled it down. It fought him. The huge, heavy fabric made flat, slapping noises in the wind as it descended in jerks. Herr Vought flung it on the ground and stepped on it to keep it from flying away. Her mother gripped Elke tighter and around the shoulders. I believe we're having a bonfire to celebrate our new Führer, said Herr Vought. No, Elke's mother gasped. Elke craned her head around to look up at her white face. You can't. Elke's father clapped his hand over her mouth. Gisa, we cannot say anything, he murmured. Vought let that flag fly illegally for a year. We can't say anything. From Black, Red, Gold by Claire Huthausen. That is it.
Congratulations to our high school 1st place winner. Claire, we would love to hear a few words from you, so if you could please turn on your camera and unmute yourself now. So sorry about that, Claire. We will try our best to see if we can get you later on into the program, but congratulations, and congratulations to all who submitted stories to this competition. Congratulations to our top 10 middle school winners as well. You all should be so proud of yourselves. please stick around because we will now be moving into a Q&A session with Daniel. Don't forget, you still have time. Add some questions to the Q&A section of your screen if you haven't already. I will now pass this on to Morgan, who will be hosting our Q&A session.
Hi, Daniel.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing good. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, awesome. I'm going to start with some questions that we got in from our audience, and then we'll move on. If we, don't have a ton of them, we'll move on to some questions that we came up with. But anybody in the audience who still has a question, feel free to post it in the Q&A section. It's the best way for me to be able to see it.
Hey,
All
Morgan,
right.
sorry, 1 second. We just got Claire up here, so if Claire, you would like to take a second to say thank you and accept your award, we'll go ahead and get you unmuted here.
Hello. Thank you so much. Sorry, my connection is very bad.
Thank you for your great story. Hi again. All right.
Hey, Morgan, how's it going?
It's pretty good. How are you?
Awesome. Very happy to be here.
Great, great. All right. So our first question comes in from Rutvi, who asks, I have a question on your experience as a professional writer. What steps did you have to take in order to physically publish the book? Because I have a short story I'd like to publish. Where would you turn in a short story to get it published?
Great question. And first, let me say that publishing is like its own. It's like you got to study writing, and that's hard enough. And then you also got to understand the industry that you're working in, which is publishing, and that is also its own thing. But it's important to understand it because it's confusing, and that's also how you get paid and how you publish as a writer. So I say all that to say, in general, take some time to go online and look at different publications. Start with authors you like and see where they're publishing short stories. When you're ready to look for an agent, which means you have a finished novel and it's done, then you want to look up who your favorite writers' agents are maybe and start there. A lot of editors and agents have blogs and have Twitter accounts and stuff like that. And it's really, really helpful to read what they're saying because it helps you understand the industry, what they're interested in, what they're bothered by, all that kind of stuff. And it's not like a school where you go and you learn and then you're done. You're always learning. I am constantly learning about the publishing industry myself and about being a better writer constantly. And I've been doing that for, 10 years. So understand that it's a long haul. Like we say, it's a marathon, not a sprint, meaning that you got to be in it. You got to pace yourself and not just like run as hard as you can and then just like collapse and be like, all right, I'm done. No, that's not how any of this works. So understand that. Like I said earlier, there's lots of rejection involved, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're a bad writer. There might be things to learn more. You're always, like I said, going to be a better writer, so keep learning, like I do every single day. As far as publishing short stories, the best thing to do is just go online and start immersing yourself in the world of short stories. So if you write fantasy, look up different fantasy publications. I can tell you right off the top of my head, Tor.com is a really great one. Fantasy, it's just called Fantasy Magazine, is really good. They have a horror subset called Nightmare. There's a lot out there. Those are a couple that I know. They're really great. Clark's World is another. But anyway, there's a ton. And some of them are really, really professional and pay really well, and they're great, and they're hard to get into. And some of them are like don't pay as well, or some of them don't pay at all. And sometimes that's okay too. You want to just explore and find out what's out there and then start submitting. The last thing I'll say about that is make sure whether you're sending to a magazine or an agent later on or a publisher, whatever you're sending to, read the guidelines and follow what they say. Every magazine will have its guidelines posted somewhere. Sometimes they'll say we're not open to submissions, and that's the guideline you got to do with it. But most of them will say, here's our guidelines. We want this many pages. We want a double spaced. We want your name here. Just do what they say. There's no reason not to follow the guidelines. That's the most basic number one thing. And you'd be surprised how many writers are just like, whatever. I'll just send it the way I want. No, follow the guidelines. That's step one. And then take it from there. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much. We had one comment come in from Claire too. Thanks so much. I've enjoyed entering this competition every year, or we've enjoyed reading your stories, Claire. I had a comment also, Daniel, specifically for you from Sydney. She said, thank you, Daniel, for taking your time to share your amazing experiences with all of us.
My pleasure.
Let's see. We had a question from Lainey who asked, my question for Daniel José Older is, do you usually write your books by hand with pen and paper or any part of them, or do you type them out or just start typing them off right off the bat?
Great question. I type. I really enjoy typing. I even like, if I'm writing like a journal entry even, I'll type it out because I love typing. Some people love writing by hand, and I know writers who write their whole first draft of their book by hand, and then they put it into, and then they type it into the computer. That would drive me bonkers, but every writer has a different methodology. So that's the main thing. The main question you have to answer for yourself is what makes the most sense for you to write the book and to finish the book. It might be both. You might want to write some of it down by hand and others on the computer. It totally depends. But for me, I will sometimes take notes with my hand in a notebook, in a sketchbook. I'll draw pictures because like I said, I always love drawing. But for the most part, I take notes on the computer and I write on the computer, and then it's all right there. And it's helping. I will show you behind me, if you can see, that is all Star Wars stuff that I'm working on. And what I did do, because it's such a big initiative that I'm working on right now, and it goes for the whole year, what those little note cards are the months of the year. And that helps me keep track of where things are happening. So there's different methods.
Thank you so much. I'm excited about this Star Wars book. Sounds like fun.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a question from Ariana who asks, what are some tips or steps that you would use to publish a book?
So besides what I said, which is make sure you learn about the industry as much as you can, I think a really important thing is to develop a community of writers. And in some ways, that's right here. You already have it. The folks in this room are all writers. And if you are all able to talk to each other some or find, buddies within this group, that's a really great way to get started. Other ways are online forums or at school. But the most important thing is, do you have a community of writers? And by community, I mean people who will tell you the truth, people who will be honest with you and who you trust, and who aren't just going to be mean for the sake of being mean, but also aren't going to pretend everything is great when it's not. That's a community. And that's hard to find. But the good news is, with like social media, it does make it a little bit easier sometimes. Be very careful. Don't give your information out to anybody. Practice safe social media. But it's really helpful to have people that you trust, other writers that you can share your work with them, and they can share their work with you, and that becomes so important as a learning skill that helps you move forward in publishing.
Thank you. Yeah, community is definitely very important. All right, Charlotte asks, what are some of your tips for revising novels, and what are some things that you would focus on in the revision process?
Okay, great question for me, because I hate revising. Some people love it. I know writers that's their favorite part of the process, and they will just jump in there and have a great time. And what they hate is writing. And I understand that. I love writing and I hate revising, but I also know that revising is really important. It's how good books become great books, and it's extremely necessary. Part of that too is, remember I was saying, like, don't want the perfect book to happen. The truth is, you can't afford to be a perfectionist and a writer. It's impossible. It's very dangerous. And we all have perfectionist inclinations, meaning we want to write the perfect book, but I'm urging you to try to rid yourself of that notion. First of all, you will never write the perfect book. Second of all, if you have convinced yourself that you have written the perfect book, then you're never going to want to take edits when you finally send it to somebody and they're like, this is great, but here's a suggestion to make it better. You're going to be like, no, I wrote the perfect book. Why would I take a suggestion? And that's not a good way to enter into this process. Editors are very smart people, and most importantly, they're not you. And you need someone else who's not you to read that book and make sure that it makes sense and that the things work that need to work, and all those things that we don't see when we're the writer. So it's really important. And I always remind myself of that. The other thing I know I struggle with is, like, edits are really hard for me because they seem to go on forever. So even though it's less actual work than writing, It's so like amorphous there's no shape to it, and there isn't like a clear, like I said, like I'm trying to write 4,000 words a day. So I know if I hit my goal, I hit my goal. With edits, it's just like they're giving you a word here, a thing there, move that paragraph over here, another scene here. It's just confusing. So I make a checklist, and that really helps me. That way I know, okay, I need to make this many changes, and I just made that change so I can check it off. So that feels a little bit good. And now I only have this many changes to make. For my brain, I need that kind of clarity in the workflow. Otherwise, it just seems like it'll go on for a month, and it's really like 2 days of work.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah. So our next question is from Autumn, and Autumn asks, "What is your favorite book?"
Ooh, man. I have a new favorite book like every day. So I don't have a good answer for that question. I always people always ask me, and I'm always just like, psh. I will say that, let's see, some recent favorites, I'll put it like that. I really love Ghost Squad by Claribel Ortega. That's such a great book. It's a middle grade book, really, really cool. I love the whole Shadow and Bone series. Like everything Lee Bardugo writes is incredible. Legendborn by Tracy Deonn is fantastic. That's a good young adult book. There's a book called Peace Sprout Chen by Henry Lien. Amazing fantasy middle grade book. So those are a couple that I love.
Do you have any authors who like kind of inspire you that you read for that? And
Sure. Octavia Butler is one. She's a fantasy science fiction writer. I really love everything that she wrote, and it really reading her like really transformed my own writing. Walter Mosley is another. He writes detective stories. Those are the two biggest ones that I always think about. But there's a lot, and even like young up and coming writers who are putting out books now. Tracy's another great example. Like I'm very inspired by them, even though they've been writing for less time than me. It's still really inspiring to read their stuff and to see what cool stories they're telling. And Claribel's another one. There's just so many great people out there doing great stuff.
nice, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, our next question. Let's see. My next question comes from Megan, and she is the writer of Thunder Snow. And Megan asks, I currently have some books in process, so I'd like to know how to keep going when you don't have inspiration in certain parts of your book.
That's a great question, and it's close to my heart because of the process I'm in right now. You have to stop. Usually when you, and this speaks to, I saw there's a question about writer's block in here too, and this is related to that. A lot of times when we think it's writer's block, it really just means that you don't know what happens next in the story, and you need to step away from the computer and figure it out. So I'm grateful to my dogs who demand that I take them out for walks 3 times a day, because it gets me away from my computer, and when I'm walking them, I'm thinking. And you get a lot, it's like kind of a joke, like the writers talk about, like, oh, inspiration, you'll be taking a shower, you'll be at the gym, it'll hit you at all different times. That's not a mistake. That's not just like a funny way of like the world messing with you. The truth is that we think more creatively sometimes when we're not looking at a blank screen with that little clicker bouncing back and forth, being like, what you gonna write next? What are you gonna write next? That's like very stressful. It's hard to be creative when you're stressed out, right? So the best thing to do is step away from the computer, take a walk. You don't have to have a dog to take a walk. Just do whatever you do, exercise, whatever it is you need to do. It's not writing. Or sometimes just I'll put on music and sit there and like, let my mind go. Or sometimes I'll draw pictures. But the point is I'm not writing. I'm doing something different.
All right, and that kind of leads us into our next question. We had a couple more questions about publishing a book for young folks, which I think we covered a bit. So our next one I'm going to skip down a little bit is, how do you make time for all of your interests?
Oh, such a great question. It is hard. How? It's really the most important thing is understanding your own process. And that's hard to do. And I'm still doing it, in part because it changes. Remember I said everything is always changing. That's true of your own artistic process too. So you can't even be like, this is what it is, and now I'm never going to think about it again. No, it changes. I used to write at night from like, midnight till dawn sometimes. Like that was my like peak writing hours. And now I would like completely lose my mind if I tried to do that. And now I wake up at sunrise and I write all day until sunset sometimes. So the point is that you have to allow yourself to change and give yourself the grace to have a flexible, fluid, weird schedule and methodology and everything else. And the important thing is that you check in about it. So, you ask yourself, like, how's it going today? This is that simple. Like, what's working? What's not working? What am I frustrated by? What am I excited about? What's going to be great? And sometimes that means, skipping ahead in the book. Sometimes it means changing it up where you're sitting. Like right now I'm sitting in my office, but I will sit in bed sometimes, on the couch. Like I'll just sit in random places and get work done because change can be really helpful in the process. And all of that is part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, let's see. Another question about publishing, which I think we talked about a little bit. We have another question from Charlotte. Do you have any advice about being confident in your writing and yourself?
That's another really good one and really tough one. Imposter syndrome is real. Imposter syndrome is when you believe that you don't deserve the things you have and you make up stories about why you got them that aren't true, but you think like, oh, there's no way that I could be in this position, right? And everybody has it. I know like very famous people who are very talented and have won tons of amazing awards, and they still wonder if they even have a right to be there. And that's hard. It's scary. But one thing is knowing, like that taught me a lot, just talking to people who I'm like in awe of, who are like, yeah, but I don't really know if I'm good enough to be here. And I'm like, what? You're one of the best writers I know. Like we all have it. I have it. More famous writers than me have it. It's very, very common. And that sucks, honestly. Shame is like a very real and very scary thing to deal with. The best way to deal with it is the same way to deal with it, the best way to deal with anything, which is head on. You have to look it in the eye and call it what it is and ask it what it wants and then keep it moving. It's the same with fear, right? There's always going to be moments of fear about your own career, about you not being enough, and not good enough writer, this, that, and the other. That's real. We all have that too. They're all connected. You have to be able to face it in order to address it. You can't run away from it because it'll follow you. It's not going to go away. It's also not going to go away even when you face it. It still comes back. But when you face it, when it comes back the next time, you've already faced it. And so maybe it'll transform and it'll be different the next time, but you still have had the experience of dealing with it before. And that transforms you and makes you stronger and better and more able to face it the next time. So all that to say, there will be moments of doubt, of self-doubt, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad writer. Doesn't mean you don't deserve to be there or anything else. It means you're human. And if anything, it's more material to write about. And a lot of my characters feel that same sense of like not belonging and shouldn't be there and all these other things, because I know that to be a very real thing that I feel that lots of people feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely with our young adult writers, I mean, that's something everybody goes through.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we had another question about your favorite book, but I think we answered that one. We have
Hey, Capricorns.
sorry, a question from Naomi about when you get an idea for a story, does it come to you randomly or do you have to brainstorm for your ideas?
It's both. It's both. There'll be moments and I'm just like living my life, like I said, walking my dogs or watching TV with my wife or whatever, and I'm like, wait. The important thing is that whenever that does happen, you have to honor it by writing it down or taking a voice note or whatever you have to do. You got to take it seriously because that's inspiration. And if you take inspiration seriously, inspiration will take you seriously and we'll keep coming back and then you work with it and everything else. So yeah, there's moments that are totally out of nowhere and you're just like, wow, that'd be really cool. And then you're like, that would be really cool. And then you develop it and think about it, write it down, play with it, turn it inside out, tell it to a friend, whatever. But then there's other times, like now when I'm in the middle of a book and I'll be like, man, I really need to figure out what's going to happen next in the scene. And in those moments, like you really do have to be intentional and be like, okay, I got to think about this. Like, what's it going to be? What's it going to work? And there'll be little sparks as you ask yourself these questions, like, what is the scene really about? And then something's going to be exciting about a scene. Whatever that is, you follow that thread. Oh, I'm really excited about this idea, this part of it. So where would that take me? And then what if we try this? You gotta be playful with it, right? You can't just be like, you can't be rigid with it. You can't have a basic binary sense of like, good and evil, or this and that and the other. Like there's all kinds of in between and gray area, especially in storytelling. And you have to be able to follow those through and see where they take you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like having something to take down notes for inspiration is always a good idea, I think. All right. Let's see. So Nadia asked, do you have to be a major in writing to truly become a writer?
So glad you asked that. But I think you already know what my answer is, because I started out my speech by saying that you are all writers because you write. None of the people who submitted for this contest, unless I am very much mistaken, have masters. You should not be having master's degrees and submitting to this contest, because you are all in middle school and high school. So you better not have a master's. And you're still writers. So you already know the answer, because you are writers and you don't have masters. I have a master. I have a master's in fine arts and creative writing, and I was already a writer when I got it. In fact, I laughed because at the graduation ceremony, when I got my master's, some random old guy was like, I think he was like the head of the school or something. He was like, "Oh, congratulations, you're all writers." And I was like, "Who are you? What are you talking about? I literally had a book out. Like, what do you mean I'm a writer now? Because you signed a piece of paper? No, none of that makes you a writer. That's nonsense. I learned a lot in my master's program. I would recommend it if it's something you want to do. I definitely learned about writing, but I don't know if I learned anything that I wouldn't have learned workshopping my pieces with other folks, or having a mentor, or taking classes, in different places. Like there's a lot of ways to learn about writing. One of the most important ways to learn about writing that we don't talk enough about is by living. It's about being alive, because that's what you're writing about. You're not writing about books you read, unless you're a literary critic. You're not writing about, anything except your life, your experience of the world. Maybe you're filtering it through another character, but that's still your experiences that you're writing about for real. And so your job as a writer is to live, not just to get a degree.
Thank you. Nadia, I hope that answers your question. So Starry asks, how old were you when you started writing?
Did I freeze? Oh, I think I froze for a second. Can you repeat the question? Okay, wait. Now you're muted. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm muted.
Okay.
All right. So third time's the charm. Starry asked, how old were you when you started writing?
Oh, so like I said, I've been writing my whole life on a certain level, because I consider like everything is writing to me, because it's storytelling, and writing is storytelling. So when I was a cartoonist, when I was a musician, to me, that's all storytelling, that's all writing. But when I sat down to write a book for real, and up to that point, I had written like words before. I'd written like a short story here and there. I tried writing a screenplay. I was writing songs, and that counts. But as far as like when I was like, I'm gonna be a writer, I'm gonna write books, 29. Now, mind you, that's right in the middle. There's people that I know, published authors who are 20, and there's people that didn't start writing until they were 50. All of that is totally fine.
Thank you. All right. We have a question about writer's block, which I think we talked about. And then Ariana asked, what's your favorite Star Wars movie?
They're all so good. Return of the Jedi is my favorite, mostly because I saw it. That's actually the first movie I ever saw in the movie theater. I was 3 years old. Came out in 1983, which makes me 41, and I just loved it. Like I was terrified, but I was in love with it, and I went back to see it many times, and I was obsessed with it, and I still am. And I just love everything about it. So, Return of the Jedi is my favorite, and I think. I don't know what my second favorite is, but I really love them all. And I love the shows. I love The Mandalorian. I love The Clone Wars. I love Rebels. I love it all. It's great. I'm a big Star Wars fan.
Yeah, we've been watching Clone Wars again and forgot how much I love Ahsoka. It's good stuff.
It's amazing. She really is.
All right. Let's see. So Jacqueline asks, what are some authors that you would recommend for teens to read?
Oh, well, some of the ones I said already. Lee Bardugo is incredible. Jacqueline Woodson is an amazing writer, of course. Claribel Ortega. Namina Foreman has a really great book out. recently just lost the title. Let's see, who else? Tracy Dion, I said. Tananarive is a really great horror writer. Highly recommend. Nalo Hopkinson is another really great writer who she's been writing for a long time. She was one of the writers that inspired me. But she's still putting out books, books for teenagers and books for adults. There's just so many, but those are some.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so Robert asked, do you make a schedule with milestones? Or do you write an outline for your stories?
Oh, great question, great question. So kind of, like for this book, because it's so intense, I really do have to be like, okay, this many words a day. Those are my milestones. I don't usually do that. I'm usually much more loose about it because it's not as tight a deadline. In general, if I'm just trying to pump out a book in a couple months, then I'll just try to be like, okay, between 1,000 and 2,000 words a day. And maybe I'd write like 4 days a week. That's kind of average for me. And again, I know like if I do that for like 3 months, that will be a book, no question. Then the question is always how to make it a good book, and that's a different story. But that's kind of the way I do milestones. And I just know it keeps me kind of on my path, basically. As far as outlines, I actually never outlined until the last book I wrote, which was Ballad and Dagger, which is a book that's coming out from Rick Riordan's imprint in May, next May. And that's a young adult book, and I love it, and I'm really excited about it. And that was the first book that I truly like outlined. Before that, I would just really go into it like, we'll see what happens, and just have kind of a world and a general idea and some characters, and just like run with it and see what happened. And that was fun for me. But I have to say, I really do enjoy outlining at this point. It just makes the process much smoother. And I think I had kind of worried when I didn't outline. I always thought that if I outlined, I would lose that sort of joy and thrill and the chaos of just being like, we'll find out what happens. Turns out I was totally wrong. Even when you outline, so many different things happen in the course of writing the book that will surprise you. I literally didn't even realize who the villain was in that last book until like the end, and then I had to go back and change a bunch of stuff to make it make sense. Stuff like that. So I do enjoy outlining at this point. And when it's a fast write, like the one I'm doing now, you need an outline. It's clutch.
Thank you. All right. So Kaylin has an interesting question. They ask, how hard is it for poets to get their work published? Do you know anything about publishing poetry at all?
I don't know the ins and outs of it. I know that it is hard. Getting anything published is really hard. I think in terms of like living a life I guess it brings up this interesting kind of question about like, what do you define as success, right? And it's really important to ask yourself that question, even wherever you are right now. If you want to be a writer, whether you're in middle school or high school or a full-grown adult, you always want to ask yourself what constitutes success. What does it mean to be a successful writer for you? Not for Stephen King, not for anybody but you, not for me, for you. And that's so important because otherwise you could be successful and not even realize it because you're trying to be someone else's version of successful. And that's a really dangerous thing. You don't want to miss the fact that you actually have reached your benchmarks and then, have more growing to do, of course. Like my definition of my own success, it always changes. It's not a static thing, just like everything else. But what I know is that like for me to be living the life that I live and writing the work that I want to write, that's success. And I've always known that. So that way I wasn't confused, like, oh, I didn't, XYZ milestones that other people have. I didn't have that, so I'm not successful. That would be wrong. I've been a successful writer since before my first book came out. Most writers don't survive off writing. It's very rare. Like it's very, very unusual for a writer to live solely off writing. Most writers have day jobs or night jobs. And even the ones that don't do other gigs like speaking engagements like the one I'm doing right now. That doesn't make a writer having a day job doesn't make them a failure. It doesn't make them unsuccessful at all. Some of my favorite and some of the most successful writers I know have day jobs. Most of them do. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And I say all that because more often than not, poets have a harder time making a living off poetry because it's smaller, it doesn't pay as well. There's fewer blockbuster poetry books that just like explode and become instant bestsellers. That's the way the industry is built. It's not fair. it is also the reality of things. And again, that's not to discourage you. I don't want anyone to ever have a takeaway from anything I say that's like, being a poet is too hard, it's not rewarding enough. Some of the poets I know are some of the happiest people I know. They love being poets, and at the end of the day, you're gonna write the work that feeds you, and I mean feeds you, it feeds your spirit, not the work that's gonna necessarily put food on the table. And that's why it's really a good thing to have a day job. Like I'm glad I was a paramedic when I first became a writer, because it meant I didn't have to like over stress about making sure my writing would like take me all the way to, do all the things that I wanted to do in my life. I could have my day job and do that for myself.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a very important distinction to make, that like, what do you define as success? That's good to hear. All right. Jenny asks, have you published any of your music pieces?
Kind of, not exactly. I had a band and we kind of put like a little demo together, but nothing super like established or anything like that. I do love music and I miss it because I haven't played it as much recently because I've been so busy with writing. And what happens is I end up writing about music and all my characters end up musicians because it's just a part of me. But I don't have like a lot of stuff published, no.
Do you ever listen to music while you're writing, or?
Oh yeah, I can't write without music playing. It makes me upset. So I definitely do it, and I'll have different playlists for different books that kind of help me really like focus on the work ahead of me.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, Ariana asks, how did you feel when you published your first book?
Oh man, there was nothing like it. It really, like I said, I went from not thinking it was really possible to seeing those words in print and my name on that book. And it's honestly like it's still the greatest feeling in the world. Like I love it. And this is again like 15 books in. Like it doesn't. I got a box of what's called ARCs, which is like when they do like a small paperback version of the book so that reviewers can read it and bloggers and stuff. And so they sent me a box of ARCs for my next book, and it was just still like, oh, it was still that feeling of just excitement of like, wow, I made this. And like, I sat at this computer, the one I'm at right now, and I made up these characters and I made up these stories, and now it's in a book, and like thousands of people are going to read it. And that's incredible.
Absolutely. So Ruthie asks, have you ever met J.K. Rowling or Stephanie Meyer? And I'll just add on to that, like, what's, your favorite author that you've met, or like an author that you've met where you were like just stunned and happy about it?
Oh yeah, no, totally. I will say John Green is actually one of the nicest writers I've ever met. He's a really great dude, and he was really nice to me. But also Tomi Adeyemi is one of the famous writers that I've met quite a few times. She's a friend. She's great people. Jacqueline Woodson is another one. Lee Bardugo is a good friend. Like there are a lot of great writers who are also great people, and I try to keep those in my circle.
All right, and we have one final question for you tonight. How did you decide to write middle grade books?
It just sort of seemed natural, like the right thing to do. I had written young adult and I had written adult, and it felt like that was a form of storytelling that would really make sense with my personality and my imagination. Because there's a part of me that's still like that 12-year-old kid that loves Star Wars and Greek mythology and everything else. So I knew it would make sense with the way that I tell stories, and it did. It turned out that it was like a very natural fit when I just started writing it. I was like, oh yeah, this works. And so, in fact, my next book coming out is a middle grade book. It's called Race to Crash Point Tower, and it's a Star Wars story. So I'm very excited about it. It comes out at the end of June.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciated having you here, and like, it was an awesome speech, and I hope that some of our young writers will take your advice to heart. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. It was really, really great hearing all your questions and reading your work. You are amazing writers, and I'm just really proud of you guys for doing all the work you're doing. So keep writing and be safe and take good care of yourselves. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Morgan, for hosting such a wonderful Q&A session. A huge thank you to our guest author, Daniel José Older, for joining us today to recognize Loudoun County's teen authors. We are truly inspired by your writing abilities and creativity, and we can't wait to see what you come up with next year. If you would like to read the top 10 stories in each age group, we will be posting an ebook on our website in the next few days. You can view this at Library.Loudoun.gov, which is GOV/IAW. Thank you to all who joined us tonight. If you know someone who wasn't able to join us for the live event, we will be posting a recording of this on our YouTube channel. A link for our YouTube channel will be posted in the chat, or you can search for Loudoun County Public Library online programs. Congratulations to all, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night.